Hello and welcome to Atypical the podcast where we look at life from a more atypical perspective. My name's Simon Heather, your host, and you're stuck with just me this week, I'm afraid. Thanks to the bank holiday and various working schedules, unfortunately none of my co-hosts were able to join me. But don't worry, they've all sent me very strongly worded letters telling me I'm not allowed to talk about the Industrial Revolution for reasons. Anyway, I wanted to start off with a little bit of news. First, from my travels to San Francisco. I'm not going to sing any of the songs. And then something which is close to the hearts of many people I know and has had something of a significant impact on the city in which I live. So, top of the agenda here. So in San Francisco, there is a train line called the BART, which is the Bay Area Rapid Transport. And whilst I have some views, because as a transport professional, I can never go somewhere without forming views on, public transport, Struan and Daniel may one day forgive me for my rant on integration with the Mooney and the weirdness of county buses and timetables and... Sorry, let's try again. And, moving on. Anyway, so the BART have done some nice things by getting autistic children in to help record new announcements for the stations and trains. I'll include a link to the story in the show notes, but I thought it was a really quite lovely thing to do, getting autistic youngsters involved. So first of all, here is Azalea, reminding people to stay safe behind the yellow line.
Hey everybody, my name is Azalea and I want to say thank you for riding BARTs. Please stand behind the yellow platform edge tiles as your train arrives. It scares the train operator if you are too close and it is dangerous. Stay safe out there, guys.
And now we have Cameron, who I noted was rather excited to tell me that I could pay with an Apple Watch, although I already had a Clipper card by this point. So anyway, here he is.
Hey everybody, my name is Cameron and I love trains and BART. You can now pay for BART using your smartphone or your Apple Watch. How cool is that? Check out clippercard.com for how to do it.
One more time, buddy. Now, I think it's great that BART are doing this, and I hope that anyone who lives or visits the Bay Area gets to hear these. And now, the second piece of news. So, 24 years ago, on April the 30th, 1999, the LGBTQ plus community in London experienced something of a horrific event that's left a lasting impact on queer individuals and indeed the collective consciousness. The Admiral Duncan bombing, which was orchestrated by a far-right extremist by the name of David Copeland, targeted a pub in the heart of Soho, which is basically the thriving hub for the LGBTQ plus community here in London. Copeland was a self-proclaimed neo-Nazi and used a nail bomb planted in a famous London pub. The outcome of this was a tragic event that not only claimed the lives of 3 people and injured well over 70, but also served as a stark reminder of the deep-seated hatred and intolerance that queer people experienced that day and some of us still experience now. As we commemorate the 24th anniversary of the Admiral Duncan bombing, it is crucial to reflect on the consequences of this act of terrorism and indeed the enduring impact it's had on the wider queer LGBTQ plus community. The attack on the Admiral Duncan was the final act in a series of 3 bombings carried out by Copeland, always targeting various minority groups in London. His objective was to incite fear and chaos, and particularly among those communities that he despised or saw as subhuman. The bombing shocked the nation and prompted just an outpouring of grief and support from both LGBTQ plus individuals and allies alike. In the immediate aftermath, solidarity marches and vigils took place across the UK, demonstrating the resilience and determination of the queer community to stand up against hate and violence. The attack led to increased security measures in queer spaces and a heightened awareness of the need for vigilance against hate crimes. However, somebody put it to me quite well the other day, where they said that the Admiral Duncan bombing had a more insidious effect on the queer community. The psychological trauma inflicted by the event is still felt by those survivors and witnesses, many of whom have since struggled with PTSD, anxiety and depression. It served as a brutal reminder that despite significant advancements in LGBTQ+ rights and acceptance, queer individuals can still be targeted by violence and hatred. The legacy of the Admiral Duncan bombing has been that it has, what's the right word here? The legacy of the Admiral Duncan bombing has been that it has prompted activism and advocacy within the queer community. The event galvanised many to push for stronger anti-hate crime legislation, better support for victims, and improved education on LGBTQ+ issues. In the years following the attack, queer individuals and organisations have worked tirelessly to raise awareness of hate crimes and to combat prejudice and discrimination. Despite the trauma and pain caused by the Admiral Duncan bombing, the community has shown incredible resilience and strength. The anniversary of the attack is not only a time to mourn those lives lost and reflect on the wounds inflicted, but an opportunity to honour the progress made in the fight for LGBTQ rights and acceptance. I think the last thing I just want to say on this is that as we do remember the victims of that horrific bombing, we should continue to advocate for more inclusive and compassionate society. Try and work towards a society that is free from hate and intolerance. The impact of this tragic event on the LGBTQ+ community has been profound, but it has also been a catalyst for change, inspiring countless individuals to stand up against hate and work together for a better future for all. Now then, for this week's episode, I thought I would touch on meltdowns. This is an enormous area, and I can only very briefly touch on the surface of it, so bear with me. But first of all, what are autistic meltdowns, I hear you cry? Well, basically, and this is my interpretation, autistic meltdowns are intense responses to overwhelming situations, often characterised by a loss of behavioural control. And it's important to emphasise that meltdowns are not tantrums, they're not manipulation. That those things are driven by a desire to achieve a particular outcome. For instance, someone might have a temper tantrum because they're not getting their way and hope that by getting angry, the other person might change their mind. Meltdowns are nothing like that. They are a natural response to a sensory overload or high stress, and there is no necessary goal or motivation behind them. It is just that, meltdown. Now, meltdowns can manifest in various ways. And these include sort of emotional outbursts, crying, yelling, expressing intense emotions. There can be physical reactions, pacing, flapping of hands, increased repetitive movements. They can even be sort of what most people might think of as aggressive behaviours, hitting, throwing things, engaging in forms of self-harm. And the other one which affects a lot of people and is less noticeable perhaps is shutdowns. Emotional or verbal withdrawal, where the person just becomes unresponsive or stops communicating. I have to say right here, it is crucial to remember that each autistic person is unique, and rightly so. We're all unique, wonderful human beings. You're listening to this podcast, you are a wonderful, wonderful person. And the ways in which people can experience meltdowns can differ significantly. You can hear how much I'm struggling talking when it's just me on my own. At this point, I'm going to have a meltdown. So that last one, shutdowns. So shutdowns, I think, are, for many people, a lesser known aspect of meltdowns. And they occur where an autistic person withdraws from their environment as a coping mechanism. So this can manifest as an emotional shutdown. So the person just might appear to be a bit numb, a bit disconnected, unable to express their emotions or engage in social interactions. They've gone a bit blank. Verbal shutdown. Somebody might stop talking or struggle to communicate their needs, their thoughts, their feelings, perhaps becoming totally non-verbal, which is what normally happens to me and at least one of my friends. Shutdowns are effectively a way for an autistic person to conserve their energy, save the spoons, and protect themselves from just overwhelming situations. Recognizing the signs of a shutdown is vital in being able to provide the right sort of support and understanding. Now, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of causes for autistic meltdowns. And there are a whole host of these triggers, and they vary from person to person. I asked my co-hosts, and I went through the internet, to Twitter, to Reddit, and various other places, and sort of asked for people's ideas on this. And I have to say, some of the triggers that can set off neurodivergent people and go into burnout or meltdown, and just the sheer weight of replies, I haven't finished wading through them all yet, but some of the common things I drew out of this were, and he says, winding himself up to read from a list. Sensory overload, so things like bright lights, loud noises, strong smells. These can all overwhelm someone. Sometimes there can be unmet sensory needs as well. They're not getting enough of a particular thing that they need. Social demands. Now it's a big one. Interacting with others, understanding, non-verbal cues and body language, navigating social situations, even things like getting lots of Telegram or WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or whatever messages, like regularly notifying you've got messages, can be quite stress-inducing, and that can be quite, challenging for all of us, but particularly for some autistic people, and that can just trigger off stress. I mean, sometimes even just, close friends, your partner, your family wanting to talk or connect when you're too tired or overwhelmed by other things can push people into meltdown. What else? Oh yes, change in routine. This one came up a lot. This is not true for all of us, but for a lot of autistic people, there is a certain reliance on routine to manage our environments. And disruption to that can lead to heightened anxiety. Heightened anxiety can lead to meltdown. Emotional stress, experiencing a really strong emotion like frustration or disappointment, anger, these can all be enough to trigger it. Overwhelming happiness can be enough to trigger it. One which I was discussing with my boss today, in fact, was unrealistic workloads. And that's not just in the workplace, that could be in education or even just at home. Demands that might cause you to end up working later and thus impact other routines, which, as we've already discussed, has impacts on other things. You might suddenly have not enough time in the evening to cook a proper meal, and so you end up not eating something or having to have takeaway, and that could upset your routine and what you were planning. You might not then be able to eat the meal you'd wanted. It can be difficult. Time management is crucially important for everyone. What else was there? Oh yes, the classic things all came up. Money, health, digestive issues, the car breaking down, missing your bus because it was raining and you needed to go back for an umbrella, and then people got in your way and you couldn't get to it, and then you missed it and it was the wrong one, and you can hear where that goes. And finally, the one which I wanted to sort of briefly mention again was masking. Trying to appear less neurodivergent, trying to look more, you can't see me doing air quotes, normal, more neurotypical in your social or work interactions, suppressing stimulation or those kind of seeking behaviours that help to calm us. We've talked about masking before, and I'll link to that episode back in the show notes. So how do people react to meltdowns? This was a difficult one for me. Unfortunately, people often misunderstand meltdowns, which can lead to negative reactions. So some common reactions that people have listed out for me are judgment. Observers might assume the person is acting out or being difficult without understanding the underlying cause, as we said at the start. They might think this person is throwing a temper tantrum. There's avoidance. People might distance themselves or avoid interactions with somebody who's experiencing a meltdown. And then there's exacerbating the situation, attempting to control a person's behaviour or forcing them to calm down can worsen the meltdown. It's crucial that we try and foster empathy and understanding when encountering someone experiencing a meltdown, as that makes a huge difference in helping us to regain control. So let's delve into a real-life story that helps to illustrate the impacts of negative reactions on an autistic person experiencing a meltdown. So I'm going to relate a story that I was sent in response to some of my questions on Reddit about this. I've changed the name and a couple of details a little bit just to protect their privacy. So we're going to talk about Emily, a young woman with autism out shopping in the supermarket, started to become a little bit overwhelmed by bright lights, loud announcements, busy crowds. Now, Sam, one of our regular co-hosts, can probably relate a little bit to the time when I was struggling a bit in a shop at Christmas and had to step outside for a moment or two to, gather myself. Anyway, back to Emily. So as the sensory overload intensified, she began to experience a bit of a meltdown. Apparently, she started crying. She was covering her ears, rocking back and forth. Now, a passerby, an onlooker, unaware of Emily's autism, assumed she was throwing some kind of tantrum and began to chastise her. Apparently, they told her she needed to grow up and stop making a scene. So, these kind of judgmental remarks are probably, unfortunately, well known to some of my listeners, and they don't really help, do they? In fact, Emily reported that it made her meltdown worse. It made her feel humiliated, and that built into that overwhelming feeling, that meltdown. Another shopper, another customer who was out shopping with their son, who was neurodivergent, recognised precisely what was going on and intervened. They sort of told the judgmental person to step back and give Emily some space, and just gave her some time to gather herself and helped her find a quiet corner where she could calm down and recover. Now, for me, the thing that came out of this really was sort of highlighting that negative reaction and what that can have on someone experiencing a meltdown. In Emily's case, the onlooker's judgment and lack of understanding only worsened the distress, while the empathetic intervention by that second person, a huge, significant difference in helping her to regain control. I could talk about my own recent sort of emotional shutdown. I had a bit of an argument, I suppose, not really an argument, but a difference in opinion about something with a good friend, and the way in which we went about it was it left me feeling a little bit like I had questioned them or was impugning them, and then it meant that I wasn't able to discuss it with them. I don't have many friends in life. For the better part of a decade, I had almost nobody. Certainly no one I would call a close friend, and only in the last few years have I found close friends. But anyway, so this all happened. I became overwhelmed. My ability to emotionally regulate myself was overwhelmed, and I just basically shut down. I went incommunicado with pretty much everyone for, 3 or 4 days, until, funnily enough, a couple of the co-hosts on this very podcast reached out to me to sort of say they'd noticed I'd been uncharacteristically quiet, and they were checking in on me. Anyway, that's by the by. So, shall we briefly touch upon how you could help someone who's experiencing a shutdown? Because we've already started to cover it a bit there. And I think the important thing to remember is that when someone is having a meltdown or a shutdown, like I tend to do, it's kind of essential to provide them with a supportive, a non-judgmental environment. And some of the things that sort of I wrote down that certainly helped me and certainly help me to help others are offering reassurance. Acknowledge their feelings, let them know you are there to help if they want it, and to support that. And that leads me into the second thing, which is respecting their space. Give them that physical and emotional space they need to recover. Don't pressurize people to engage or communicate. Let them know you are there for them. They can depressurize and come to you when they need to. You can minimize that sensory input if you can. If you can reduce the noise, if you can dim lights, if you can remove that extra strong smelling candle or whatever stimuli it is that might be causing it, and just create a more calm, relaxed, comfortable environment. But most of all, just have some patience. Allow us, them, whoever, allow them time to process, to recover from that overwhelming situation. Don't rush them to snap out of it. So, what are ways in which we can deal with it? What are some potential coping mechanisms? There are a few coping strategies which I can sort of recommend. I think they sort of boil down to identifying the triggers, knowing what causes meltdowns for you, and therefore you can work to try and avoid or minimize exposure to those triggers. There are self-regulation techniques, deep breathing. Some people find mindfulness works, fidget toys to help manage stress or sensory input, for example. Having your own kind of, I guess, safe space, a designated quiet place that you can retreat to during the more overwhelming situations. Somewhere where you've got your teddy bear or your favorite blanket, or you can play the music you want, or read the book that you want, or enjoy the sunshine coming through the window. Whatever it does that gives you that relief and helps to lessen the meltdown. And I think having a support system in place, if you can, is really, really helpful. Having a network of friends, of families, colleagues, co-workers, professionals, whatever, who can understand and might be able to provide you with that support, that help, that understanding that you're not alone when you're going through a meltdown. That is invaluable. When I was talking to the other co-hosts and indeed the internet at large, a number of people talked about emotional regulation. Now, very, very broad brush here. Emotional regulation is the process, I guess, of recognizing, understanding, and managing our emotions in order to achieve a more balanced and stable emotional state. So the concept is especially important for autistic people because we may struggle to recognize and regulate our emotions effectively, making us more susceptible to meltdowns. But by developing emotional regulation skills, we can better identify when we're approaching meltdown, I guess, and we can take steps to help de-stress ourselves or at least to reduce the risk. I did a bit of reading around this subject, and I'll put some links to some good articles I found in the show notes. But here are some sort of strategies that you could employ to help, I guess, improve your emotional regulation. First and foremost, as with pretty much everything, self-awareness. Just encouraging people to pay attention to your emotions, to your physical sensations, the thought patterns that occur, to help you recognize early signs of distress. Label your emotions, helping to understand. So learning, I guess, to put a name to your emotions, making it easier to communicate your feelings and your needs to other people, and self-soothing techniques. Your own way of finding something that calms you, as I suggested above already, things like deep breathing. One which a few people actually recommended to me online was a progressive muscle relaxation, or just some kind of grounding exercise, something that helps you to regulate yourself, something that helps you to anchor yourself in. So I think in addition to improving emotional regulation, there are a few other coping mechanisms that can help you to manage stress and minimize the risk of meltdown. Lots of us follow sort of proactive self-care where we can, establishing routines that prioritize ourselves, making sure we get enough sleep, eating a balanced diet, regular physical exercise. All of these things can help us build emotional resilience and help reduce stress. Some people find that mindfulness works well for them. Techniques like meditation, yoga, deep breathing exercises can help some autistic people to be more aware of their emotions and physical sensations, allowing them to better manage stress and prevent meltdowns. Doesn't work for everyone, but I know a lot of people for whom it does work. Lots of us develop effectively, I suppose, a toolbox. We have our own personalized set of strategies and tools that help to self-regulate in different situations. That can include sensory tools like noise-cancelling headphones, an absolute godsend. Fidget devices, some people like visual aids, so like adult colouring books perhaps, which takes us through to calming activities, drawing or listening to music. And if you can build a support network, strong support group of friends, family, people who understand, that's invaluable. But I think it's important to try and find something that works for you, to practice and incorporate those coping mechanisms into your daily life. Creating consistency and repetition really do help to reinforce the effectiveness of these things. Some ways in which this might work for you could be role play. You could practice different scenarios where emotional regulation and coping strategies might be needed. If you've got someone else there who can do it with you, that could help you to feel more prepared, more confident in your ability to handle challenging situations. Creating those visual aids, list out your coping strategies, or create a mood chart. I saw someone talking about to remind yourself to practice that emotional regulation and self-care throughout the day. And if you know someone else who's prone to these, just regular check-ins, encouraging conversation about emotions and coping strategy, creating a safe space with your friends to share feelings and experiences. Now, I've been talking for some time, and I hopefully have given you some insight into how some people might experience meltdown and shutdown, and some of the possible causes. Now, there are a great many more potential causes, and people will experience these in very, very different ways. As we've said before, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So I turn to you once more, the listener. If you feel there is more I could add to this, if you feel like you'd like to share your own story of meltdown or shutdown, or if you have some fantastic coping mechanism that you think we should cover, do please get in touch, because it'd be amazing to hear from you and to share it with our other listeners. Finally, for my American listeners, one of you reached out and told me that it is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, AAPI, I think, which is observed annually in May, and is a time to recognise and celebrate the diverse contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to the United States in terms of the culture and economic and social fabric. It's a month-long celebration, which is an opportunity to reflect on the rich history and vibrant culture of the AAPI community, which obviously encompasses a huge range of ethnic groups, including Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, Indian, Vietnamese, Hawaiian, Samoan, many, many others. As I understand it, and I had to do a bit of research on this, so I'm sorry, it dates back to 1977. There was a senator who tried to get Congress to introduce a resolution to recognise this. It failed. But in 1978, Jimmy Carter signed a resolution proclaiming the first 10 days of May to be Asian Pacific American Heritage Week. And presidents from then on just kept re-signing this. But it wasn't until 1990 that President George Bush, the older one, HW, actually signed into law an article, I suppose, an official designation, making May the Heritage Month, and that sort of was agreed by Congress in 1992, according to the website I found. As I understand it, May was chosen to commemorate two important milestones in Asian American and Pacific Islander history. There was the arrival of the first Japanese immigrants to the United States on the 7th of May 1843, and the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on the 10th of May 1869, which was largely built by Chinese immigrant labourers. In recent years, the celebration of this Heritage Month has become more significant in light of, frankly, an alarming rise across the world, but specifically in America, of anti-Asian hate crimes and discrimination. So as we celebrate the diverse contributions of this amazing community, it is crucial to acknowledge and combat racism and prejudice that continues to impact the lives of our friends and families. It's really important to amplify their voices and their experiences to foster greater understanding and empathy among people of all backgrounds. And by honouring the unique heritage and contribution of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, we help to reaffirm those values of diversity, of inclusion, of mutual respect that lie at the heart of a just and equitable society. Right. Like I say, I've been waffling, so thank you as ever for downloading this podcast and for continuing this journey with me. We will cover meltdowns and shutdowns in greater detail as part of a group later, and I very much look forward to that. But until then, I hope you have a very pleasant weekend. Bye for now. This is Simon in post. So after I recorded this episode, I went back to a few of the communities that I'd reached out to talk a little bit about what I was covering and just ask if there was anything else that I should think about. And, well, the responses were quite interesting, actually, and I wanted to include some of them here. We will probably cover these in future episodes. But people thought that I should do a bit more on myths and misconceptions. So maybe a bit more to address that common misconception about meltdowns, the idea that they're tantrums or a sign of poor parenting or whatever. Now, this podcast has always been more aimed at adults, but we can't get away from the fact that neurodivergent adults come from neurodivergent children. Quite a few people who responded to me talked about supporting caregivers, parents, guardians, even teachers. They suggested that it might be nice to talk about the guidance for parents and educators on how to create autism-friendly environments and support autistic people in their care, which could be immensely helpful. Several of them who identified as parents both with autism or parents of neurodivergent children suggested to me that it'd be really helpful if we could be discussing the importance of routine, of those visual supports we talked about, of effective communication strategies, which can empower, I guess. I have views about the word when it was used within that context, but people who are autistic or regularly interact with autistic people. As I said at the end of the episode, one of the things that came back from people was suggesting that I try and get more personal experiences and perspectives, including interviews or stories from autistic people, from parents, even from professionals. If there are any listening, great. I worry now, but still. And those who have experienced or supported someone through a meltdown. The idea, of course, is that these could provide valuable insight and help listeners to understand the challenges and indeed, I suppose, the triumphs associated with meltdowns. Something that came up again and something we've always been incredibly strong on with this podcast. I mean, it's part of the reason why I started it. It's something a number of us campaign on, is the importance of self-advocacy. It's incredibly important for us to try and encourage people to develop those self-advocacy skills and assert their needs, their preferences, their boundaries, which can help prevent meltdowns and promote overall well-being. And lastly, the big thing people kept coming back to, and indeed something we've covered repeatedly on this podcast, is simply building awareness and understanding. I refer you back to the first episode of this series, and indeed the very first episode of the podcast, if you want to know more about what we think on autism acceptance and indeed wider neurodiversity. Right, I really must stop recording now before I start.
And the dish ran away with the spoon.